I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement. MIT acknowledges Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land on which we sit is the traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of their territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Trinity Simons. Trinity has said that she's built a career on sharing the process of design as a tool with those who don't already possess it. She insists that design matters, that it's not a luxury or simply a matter of how things look, but that it is in fact essential as a way of pulling problems apart, turning them over, and opening up new ways of thinking about the future. New ways of thinking that would not just be nice to have, but that are urgently needed, as made clear by many of the events that have unfolded over the last year. Trinity Simons has served as the executive director of the Mayor's Institute on City Design, MICD, since 2012. In this role, she works with mayors across the country on the nation's most pressing urban planning and design challenges. She speaks about the intersection of design and politics at universities, events, and symposia across the country. During MICD sessions and throughout the year, Trinity adds to her deep understanding of mayors' challenges and needs, forming long-standing relationships with local leaders across the country. She elevates the profile of the Institute and maintains a deep bench of design professionals eager to serve as resource team members, connecting mayors to critical issues of urban development. During the COVID-19 pandemic, she led the Institute's transition to serving mayors in a virtual environment, including the creation of new program offerings, such as the Mayor's Virtual Seminars, MICD Alumni Technical Assistance, and the MICD Just City Mayoral Fellowship in partnership with the Just City Lab at Harvard GSD. Under her leadership in 2021, MICD was awarded the Landscape Architecture Foundation's Founders Award, its highest honor for organizations. Upon receiving this honor, Trinity said, "At MICD, we strive to infuse justice, equity, and sustainability in all of our work with mayors. Nowhere is this more important than in the public realm. Local elected leaders and design professions are natural allies in understanding and solving the myriad of challenges facing our cities today." Trinity has a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Arkansas and a Master of City Planning from right here at MIT DUSP. Trinity will talk for the next 45 minutes or so, followed by an open question and answer session. Anyone is welcome to post any comments or questions in the chat at any time, and then Trinity will respond at the end. So please join me now in extending a warm welcome back to MIT to Trinity Simons.
Thanks, Marie. That was a very thorough introduction. I see some friendly faces in the group here as well. I'm just going to share my screen. Get this started. That all looks good. So, so thanks for having me back and for this opportunity. As I was sitting down to prepare this presentation, I realized I haven't had too much time to breathe, but too much time to look at the work that we've done over the last year, to reflect on the needs of mayors and how we've responded, how they've really changed over the last year, and to put that into the larger context of what we were seeing prior to the pandemic and what may be coming up post-pandemic. So it was a fun exercise for me to prepare for this lecture. So thanks for the opportunity. So as Marie said, I am a DUSPer with an architecture background. So I'm a CDDer naturally. Was always interested in the intersection of leadership, specifically elected leadership and design and planning, which is what led me to the Mayor's Institute and the role that I'm in now. So I'm going to introduce the Mayor's Institute. Introduce the Mayor's Institute a little bit before I get into the bulk of the talk, just to make sure everyone kind of understands exactly what it is that we do at the Mayor's Institute. So the Mayor's Institute, we were founded in 1986 by the former mayor of Charleston, South Carolina, Mayor Joe Riley. Mayor Riley founded the Institute with the base idea that the mayor is really the city's chief urban designer. The Mayor's Institute is the leadership initiative of the National Endowment for the Arts. It's in partnership with the United States Conference of Mayors. But over the last 35 years, we've worked with over 1,200 mayors, over 700 design and development professionals. And we do that through these small, intimate institute sessions where we bring together a group of usually about 8 mayors together with 8 leading design and development experts. So people who represent fields of architecture, landscape architecture, urban planning, transportation planning, real estate development, economic development, historic preservation, to talk about what the mayor considers to be his or her most pressing city design, city planning challenge. These are closed door, there's no observers, there's no staff, there's no press. Each mayor presents a case study from their city, so it's a project that they're working on, and the whole group gives feedback on that. So this feedback ranges from design ideas to implementation, from funding strategies to community engagement. Interspersed with that, the resource team, our design and development experts, give presentations from their areas of expertise. So the event lasts about 2.5 days. We do 5 to 6 of them a year in cities throughout the country. So mayors walk away from the Institute with very concrete ideas for the project that they bring. But we really think the true value of the Institute lies in this exposure to the design process, to design thinking, how design can serve as a tool in each of their leadership portfolios. And so we often joke that that we're a leadership development program that's like masquerading as a technical assistance program. So that's like Mayor's Institute in 2 minutes. We'll of course kind of come back to that. But for this talk, so we're going to break this into 3 parts. So we're going to talk about a little bit about mayors BC, mayors before COVID, a little bit of what we were seeing with mayors. So the kind of general trends, but also about the work that we were doing. We'll talk about what we've seen during COVID. So the needs of mayors during COVID, what's been emerging, but also the work that we've been doing and how we've been serving mayors during COVID. And then talk a little bit about what we're seeing as needs that are emerging for mayors and for cities post-COVID. So for a little bit of additional context, I started working with mayors back in 2005. So I was actually the program manager with the Mayor's Institute from 2005 to 2007. So before I was executive director, I had a stint at the Mayor's Institute. But during that time, we spent a lot of time convincing mayors that design, specifically that the quality of the built environment was something that was important at all. And so when you're convincing them of that, you necessarily spend less time giving them the tools to do it and more time just convincing them that, like, quite frankly, this is important stuff. I would say that was like the bulk of what we were doing in 05 to 07. So it's a real uphill battle that like the quality of the public realm is important. When I took over as executive director in 2012, by then I would say mayors really got it. Like at that point, they were running on quality of place. They were running on the things that made their city unique. But they understood that to recover from the Great Recession, their city had to be a place that people wanted to be. We used to say during this era that people chose where they wanted to live first, and then they found a job. And so the Great Recession, generally that's accepted to have lasted from about December 07 to June of 09. So when I took over as executive director in July of 2012, the recovery was underway in most places. And the discussion amongst mayors already at that point was centering around how even within cities, it was uneven and inequitable. The 2013 elections marked a sea change in local politics. This, I would say, largely went unnoticed at the time, but those of us that work with mayors every day saw it. There was a whole group of mayors who happened to get elected who had all run on platforms of equity and inclusion and advocating for parts of their city that had been left behind. This included new mayors of cities like New York, Charlotte, Minneapolis, Seattle, Boston, Pittsburgh. It was just after Elizabeth Warren had gotten elected in Massachusetts in 2012, had run on an unabashedly progressive platform that had gotten national attention. And there was this awakening about progressive policymaking and the need for it and how it could happen at a local level as well. So looking back, I think we could maybe call these mayors past generation progressives. Once Trump was elected, in general, they were seen as not having moved left far or fast enough. Some lost after one term, others decided not to run for re-election, and others, maybe just continued to be pushed from the left. After Trump's election, we began to see increasingly mayors elected that looked more like the communities that they represented. And were breaking some symbolic barriers in their communities too. We had Michael Tubbs, was the youngest first African-American mayor of Stockton. We have Lori Lightfoot, the first openly lesbian woman mayor of Chicago, also the first Black woman mayor of Chicago. We have many Black mayors that were also the youngest mayor in their city's history. We've got Mayor LeVar Stoney of Richmond, Chokwe Lumumba of Jackson, Randall Woodfin in Birmingham, Quentin Lucas in Kansas City. But they weren't just breaking symbolic barriers. These mayors were also bringing in very progressive policy ideas. We've got Mayor Michael Tubbs with a guaranteed income pilot that's now expanded into mayors for a guaranteed income, with 40 cities committed at last count. That's still growing. Mayor Lori Lightfoot took on the alderman prerogative as her first executive order, and other council reforms since. She's been a leader in police reform. Randall Woodfin in Birmingham took on various progressive reentry programs early in his term. Also during this time, as trust was eroding in government in general, it remained pretty strong in local government. These numbers represent trust in government. I think they were from 2017, but the numbers held pretty steady during this period from about 2017 to 2019. These are from Gallup and Pew polls. So we've got 20% of people saying that they trust the federal government some or all of the time. We've got 63% of people saying they trust state government some or all of the time. And we've got 70% of people saying they trust local government. And so as government becomes more removed, trust goes down. I would be really curious to see these numbers post-pandemic, which I have not yet seen. But for the Mayor's Institute during these years, we increasingly saw mayors bring us much more complex projects. The kind of low-hanging fruit projects were gone. The downtown revitalizations, the waterfront parks, like even if those projects weren't done, the mayors generally knew what they needed to do to get them done. And increasingly mayors were bringing us really thorny issues, how to revitalize former Black main streets that had been abandoned decades ago, but where memory lives really strongly. The auto-centric corridors were all of your chain store development that could be anywhere USA, but they also serve as a gateway to your city. And so this brings us to 2020. A little bit about our MICD kind of bureaucracy and structure before I get into our programming and what we saw with mayors. So I've already explained what we do at MICD. We host these institute sessions where we bring mayors together with design and development experts. We do this about 6 times a year, but we do this in person in cities all over the country. And so much of this like secret sauce is the experience of mayors getting away from their staff, getting away from their city, getting away from distractions with other mayors, and with new trusted vetted advisors. And so much of this happens during these informal times. It happens during the coffee breaks, it happens during the meals, and we like knew that this magic wouldn't transfer translate into a virtual environment. But we are blessed to have very stable funding. We are and for a program of our size, a good amount of it. So we're a leadership initiative of the National Endowment for the Arts, which basically means as long as there is a National Endowment for the Arts, there is a Mayor's Institute. This is in partnership with the United States Conference of Mayors that also greatly values the program and contributes from their general fund. As soon as COVID hits, we were getting phone calls from our program staff asking us, how we plan to retool our funding in the absence of in-person programming. At this point, we didn't know if this was going to last 2 weeks or 6 months or a year. But we were also like at this point spending our days helping mayors get PPE. We were in full crisis mode and no idea what the long-term needs would be. But as things calmed down, we clearly saw that we were in this for the long haul. Um, and we had also long wanted to find ways to better support mayors after they had attended a Mayor's Institute session. So this provided us with an opening to test ideas that had been percolating. But we joke that it is, a lot easier to spend funds on hotel contracts and plane tickets and meetings than it is on like webinars. So we also had to think about scale as well. But bigger picture, here's also what we all know, that by summer, mayors are dealing with the collision of COVID-19, unrest amid protests for racial justice, and deep economic impacts in their cities. And so this trick was to develop entirely new programming to support them during a time when need was great and capacity was low. We're able to talk to them informally, to some mayors that we knew well, but we're not able to do a survey in any kind of formal way about what they might be interested in terms of programming. So we had to take the expertise that we had built, create new programming and content, and like throw them at the wall and see what stuck. um, but this also gave us a chance to express our values through programming with much more clarity and specificity than before, that we could set up frameworks for mayors to have conversations about the issues that they were facing, use the lens of the built environment to explore them. I would say at MICD that we've always tried to center equity and justice in our conversations. We've done this through case studies that we help mayors select, through resource team members that we bring to the table. But we were able to do this much more directly in 2020. A great example of this is public safety. I know that Ifoma Evo is going to be speaking with you later, so I'm not going to steal her thunder, especially with her content, but we had her do a virtual seminar with mayors last year. It was by far one of the most popular that we did, sparking one of the most substantive conversations. Our virtual seminars were one of these programs that we created last year. We were responding to a few needs that we knew existed, for mayors to be able to explore a specific COVID-19 and or racial justice topic in a safe space. For us, a safe space means without press. For mayors to have time with other mayors. This is very different than just a webinar where mayors are consuming information, but for them to also be able to discuss and talk these issues out specifically with their peers. So what this program does, our virtual seminars are scheduled for an hour. We can't realistically request more of a mayor's time. We played with this and attendance dropped. With the presenters giving a short 20 to 30 minute presentation. I'm a big believer in short presentations, especially for mayors. Keep presentations short and the discussion substantive. Especially at the executive level. I think anything you can present to them in an hour, you can almost certainly do with more clarity in about 20 minutes. And then the rest of the time was open discussion with the mayors. These events typically draw about 8 to 20 mayors. 20 really gets too big for a discussion. So kind of 8 to 12 is a sweet spot. The discussion was always considered to be off the record, but we made that presentation portion available on our website after the events. And we did these on topics ranging from removing and recontextualizing, re-envisioning monuments, creatively using park space during the pandemic, winterizing restaurants for outdoor dining during the pandemic, streets for pandemic response and recovery, several more. And one of them was a FOMA and a design-based approach to community safety. And I think this resonated with mayors so well because the political reality, because of the political reality that they live in with the defund the police conversation. This was so well encapsulated with a New York Times interview with Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot back in July, where she said, to begin, she said, when I hear this issue of defunding, I hear we don't have enough resources in communities of color, and you spend way too much on the police. And I agree with that, right? That's what she said. But then she went on to break down what defunding means. In Chicago and a lot of cities, 90% of the budget is personnel. And so when you talk about defunding, you're talking about getting rid of officers. In Chicago, like a lot of cities, the diversity lies in junior officers. So when you're talking about defunding, you're doing it in the context of a collective bargaining agreement that requires you go in reverse seniority, which means you're getting rid of younger officers. It means you're getting rid of Black and brown people. Another mayor said very simply, he said, I can't sell defund the police to my grandma. But this conversation that we had with FOMA, it circumvented that altogether, and it made a more productive space for mayors to engage where we could understand that as shorthand for reimagining public safety. We could talk about safety improvements that come from cleaning up vacant lots, blight remediation, investing in parks. And we know that people tacitly feel their own value through investments that are made in the spaces around them. Does your city value you and your neighbors the same as the wealthier neighborhood on the other side of town? And what does the condition of the sidewalk tell you? What is the investments in parks in the public realm? And if FOMA's work is like far more specific and wondrous than anything that I've described here, so you got to make it to her her talk. It's really wonderful. And so those seminars were very low touch, though we've had a number of mayors attend, like virtually all of them. But we were also looking for a way to take a much deeper dive on racial justice in the built environment with mayors, and a way to try to translate this MICD experience virtually, or at least engage mayors with more depth. And so in 2019, I was invited to an assembly of practitioners working on justice issues. And this was with Tony Griffin and the Just City Lab at the GSD. And this event was really transformative in my thinking on how to engage mayors with justice, but I hadn't yet had an opportunity to really put it into practice. But around this time, we were mapping out some strategies for longer term virtual engagements with mayors, but nothing that I particularly liked or that I thought would work well or be successful. And I got an email from her one night about a reunion for that group. And I think I emailed her back immediately, and it's like something clicked. And I was like, what would it look like to build a Just City curriculum for mayors? And we just took off running. But we launched the Just City Mayoral Fellowship in fall of 2020 with 7 mayors. We designed an 11-week curriculum focused on racial justice in the built environment. Mayors met for once a week for an hour, primarily prompted with a lecture that was followed by a discussion. They also identified a predominantly Black underinvested neighborhood in their cities and developed a manifesto of action that was centered around undoing injustices in their neighborhood or in their cities. So critically, mayors, these mayors especially, are already creating cultures of equity and justice in their offices. So we asked, how could we bolster their work? How could we further equip them? How could we give them a safe space to work through these thorny issues and give them a language for some of their hunches? And what we found in this process was that these mayors are intimately aware of many of their city's challenges, that they're highly concentrated in specific geographic areas. They know the local histories of ups and downs on each block in their cities. They have an encyclopedic knowledge of all the programs and policies that have been tried over the years. And then what the Just City Fellowship did was we equipped them with a thorough understanding of how these patterns played out in cities across America, of like the common histories of injustice, how these policies dictated at all levels of government have created and upheld them over the decades. And that these injustices so often fall across racial lines makes them complex and challenging and absolutely critical to undo. And so, we know that no single policy or program can undo these decades of neglect and mistreatment, and that it really takes a seismic shift in the way that government operates and the way it engages its residents and values their knowledge of their neighborhoods and their hopes and dreams for their futures. And these mayors all came into office with a gut instinct that this shift was needed and knew that surrounding themselves with smart and curious people was the way to achieve meaningful change. So this fellowship also introduced mayors to a group of professionals that have dedicated their careers to this seismic shift and towards using urban design to build better places, to bring justice to the lives of people in those places. This also requires that people in positions of power and influence for mayors to have a fluency in place-based fields like urban planning that have historically been used as tools of injustice, and to take a thorough understanding of the way that these tools can instead be used to empower residents that have long seen the deck is stacked against them. So, we heard that this fellowship gave mayors the chance to take a step back and recommit to themselves and their staff and the public, and to really take a bold stand on serving people who have been left behind by government in the past. And creating and taking these mayors through this program, working with Tony and her team, was the highlight of 2020 for me, for sure. We're looking to do this again in 2021 and well into the future. So if the Just City Fellowship was, true to the MICD program and that it was a combination of education and technical assistance, our most recent engagement with mayors is maybe something that's more akin to like a mayor's graduate school. There are three things that we consistently hear from mayors that they want. One is to come to MICD again. They can only come once as mayor. One is to have their staff be able to experience it, or at least to have their staff have some of that education. And the third is that, after their case study stalls or makes some progress, they want to have more in-depth help on it. So targeted technical assistance has kind of always been a little out of our reach and scope. Though there's other programs that do it really well. We direct mayors to it, the AIA, ULI, APA. None of them have the direct focus on the mayor, and often don't necessarily have the trust of the mayor that we have. And the finances have also just never really worked for us. It's something that we have never been able to scale, not with our staff capacity and funding and bit of our bureaucratic structure. Remember, we do have a sizable chunk of government funding, and also remember that until the pandemic, virtual engagements didn't have the same kind of legitimacy that they have now. So that avenue wasn't really open to us. So our alumni technical assistance program that we just created pairs a mayor and their team with 2 to 3 design and development experts to work with a mayor on their choosing on a 6 to 8 week time frame for in-depth advice, analysis, and recommendations. Round one, we're working with 12 mayors and 27 resource team members. That's what we call our design and development professionals. A surprising find, we gave mayors the option for their projects. They could do an extension of their MICD case study, the project that they originally brought to the Mayor's Institute. They could apply with COVID specific projects, or racial justice in the built environment project, or some combination thereof. We had no mayors apply with COVID specific projects. Most applied with extensions of their MICD case studies. And we did actually expect more mayors to apply with COVID specific projects. I think the reason they didn't is that they have to move very quickly in order to be responsive to rapidly evolving needs. And an opportunity like this is probably better suited for something that's longer term. I think back to the best example of this is probably that shift shift to outdoor dining that cities adopted last summer when businesses began to reopen. And there was some sharing of best practices and policies and regulations and insurance and such. But there was a lot of trial and error. And in most cities, mayors listening directly to the needs of their restaurant owners. But we also saw a lot of examples of cities that were maybe moving too quickly. And I think back to Oakland, like launching their Slow Streets initiative last April, and the early headlines heaped a lot of praise. And it's like 74 miles of open streets. There's a lot of early focus on play and recreation, and it was about keeping people safe while they were walking or biking. What Oakland did right, they solicited a lot of feedback, both informally and formally. One of the primary things that they heard from their Black and Brown communities were that they weren't necessarily going outside to recreate, that they had a high percentage of essential workers. They were going to work. What they did need were safer ways to get to the essential resources throughout their neighborhoods. So the grocery stores and testing sites and health clinics. So we worked with their communities to identify a number of critical areas and resources and launched Essential Places, which was an offshoot of Slow Streets. So, the lesson here, the city acted quickly in launching the program, but they collected data and solicited feedback. They also pivoted quickly when the residents told them, what else they needed. But for our technical assistance program, we saw that mayors were enthused to have the opportunities to get back to visioning for their cities. If you remember from before, most of the case studies in recent years we said had been thorny issues. Many of them were already related to racial justice issues. This holds true here. We did think that mayors were going to be so strapped for time that our team would be mostly spending time working with their staff on the project. Instead, the mayors have been super engaged, clearing their calendars and taking the opportunity to bend the ears of our world-class experts. We thought this program would look more like, kind of true technical assistance with experts giving direction on a project. And instead, in a lot of cases, it's looked more like mentoring and coffee hour with the mayor. The mayor just so happy to have, the resource to bounce ideas off of, which we are totally happy with. So a few, reflections on the kind of past year. I think just in general, it's just like mayors get it that through all these programs, mayors know the ins and outs of their city. Again, they know this block by block accounting of where businesses were through time, the lingering memory of a city, what policies have tried and what's failed, where and why trust has been broken. But they're often missing the tools of connection. And, like us, they can be so steeped in the day to day and putting out fires, especially during COVID, that harnessing that role of mayor as connector and the bully pulpit can fall to the wayside without concerted effort. That's why programs like ours and other opportunities that provide mayors with mayor-specific education and opportunities for mayors to connect are so important. People experience the world through their city, through their roads and sidewalks and stores and parks and libraries and rec centers and hospitals and health centers and schools. Mayors are also often missing the tools to get over the hump, the implementation piece. They have a hunch about what needs to be done. They're often right, but they often need help with the steps necessary to get there. That's where the breakdown often occurs. And just a word of caution. I talked earlier about the sea change of local leaders that we first saw in 2013, or maybe our progressive mayors 1.0. Version 2.0 came out during the Trump years, and we don't really know what's next. But this past year was really hard for mayors. That mayors were routinely threatened with violence. Their families threatened. The space for nuance is gone. To quote a mayor up here, that you're absolutely going to disappoint people. The way the national conversation's gone, at least since 2016, it's pledge allegiance to these sets of values without fail, without equivocation, without nuance. If you don't, you're the enemy. Doesn't matter if you're right 8 out of the 10, not good enough. We lost a lot of really good mayors this year. A number decided not to run for re-election. A number lost re-election. Some of the losses were really hard to watch. One in particular can be traced directly back to the city losing its daily newspaper. The blog that filled that gap masquerades as a news source. It says it's not without bias. The founder has openly said he was trying to take down the mayor, but it was also the primary news source for most of the residents of the city. And, it's like, guess what? Between reporting on the mundane happenings of the city and the inflammatory, like blatantly false things about the mayor, he took the mayor down. One mayor said in one of our meetings that he worries that like the young talent he mentors will see the vitriol that's thrown his way and decide that he never wants to serve. So you worry during this time about the potential public servants of the future. But what's in store for our cities post-pandemic? Books are going to be written on this, so I'm not going to even pretend to answer that here, but we'll think about it from what mayors are thinking about right now. Good news is that the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 provides direct funding to cities of all sizes based on a formula. It's pretty flexible. Most immediate discussion right now is how can the funds be used and what qualifies as a COVID-related expense. Nearest term, mayors are thinking about, vaccine in most places. It's the county that's in charge of public health. In a lot of places, the state has taken over vaccine distribution. The federal pharmacy program is different from this. The vaccine you can get at CVS is different from your county, city, state waiting list. So like, you don't need me to tell you that that's a hot mess and that there's no national strategy. You're probably dealing with this with either for yourself or for your loved ones. But it's mayors that are out in front. It's mayors that can help build the public trust in the vaccine, which is the role that most of them have tried to take on in this. The impending eviction crisis, $25 billion was allocated for rental assistance in the COVID-19 economic relief bill, but eviction data varies wildly from place to place. 1/3 of US counties have no available annual eviction figures. Some states had systems set up to distribute those funds. Others are having to create them from scratch. You can imagine the ones that have to create them from scratch also have tremendous need. And residents also have to know how to navigate the system anyway. And we know how well that often goes. And reopening schools and the economy safely are all front of mind for mayors. But the longer term, balancing telework and office working and the future of the commercial real estate market. Mayors are already asking, what's going to be the next innovative wave of mixed use if office occupancy doesn't come back? The future of transit. Will people return to low carbon methods of transportation like buses and subways? But our reality, as we all know, also in many places, especially outside of major cities and major city centers, buses weren't working to begin with. They were last resort transportation. They were inefficiently serving already marginalized communities. If we prioritized and modernized that experience, what would it look like? And, Arlington, Texas is a great example here. This is a city of 40,000 people with a suburban footprint. They've been partnering with VIA for the last 3 years to provide affordable public transportation on demand. It's free from fixed routes and schedules, directs passengers in real time to virtual bus stops that are a couple of blocks away from where they currently are to enable multiple passengers headed in the same direction to efficiently share a ride. I think that had been going for about 60% of their city for the last 3 years, and they just expanded it to their entire city. A lot of mayors are looking at that as a model moving forward right now. The future of retail. Brick and mortar retail was already on its way out before the pandemic. I think this is going to accelerate, especially with malls and other big box retail, but restaurants and entertainment are going to continue to thrive. Then there's this whole conversation about the future of the city, and I laugh a little bit about this one. Especially around the beginning of the pandemic, it was really popular to speculate on the future of the city. Is density dead? Is like urbanism dead? And I think those fears are overblown, but our cities are going to change in ways that we can both, can predict and can't predict. But mid-sized cities are showing signs that they're going to continue to thrive. Housing prices are through the roof, but people are looking for space and amenity-rich places. There's a little bit of talk of Zoom towns or Zoom burbs, but with the assumption moving forward that office workers may only need to go into their office a few days a week. So people are looking for for something that's more than just bigger houses and bigger yards. They're also looking for cities that have a strong sense of place. So cities that have invested in their parks and restaurants and walkability and charm and the arts. This is all starting before the pandemic. Is it, continuing to accelerate? I think the places that are going to win are the places that continue to invest in sense of place. But another word of caution. I think a lot of people think recovery will be swift. A lot of talk of the roaring 20s, but our last swift recovery, as we discussed previously, was very uneven and very inequitable. I think mayors are much more aware of this than they were after the Great Recession, have better tools, are being held accountable like never before. If there's anyone that can advocate for justice and equity, who can advocate for those that are left behind by inequitable systems, who see the impact of those systems every day, it is a good mayor. And I will pause right there for discussion.